good afternoon to you all. And yes, I think I need to make a short request. And the request is that if I want to speak well, I must ask you just for a moment of some quiet, because someone who supported me very well in all these academic endeavors, that is to say, the mother of our children, passed away not even a year ago. And I'm sure just by a little quiet, I will have the stamina to talk. Just a little moment. I will be quiet and then I will talk. Thank you. Thanks very much. I am most grateful for this invitation, because it really is an invitation that reveals to me the core of what philosophy is, namely dialogue. So no dialogue, no philosophy. As we know, even Socrates survived on dialogue. And so it is really a pleasure that I am here to engage in dialogue with you. One of the points that kept me thinking was exactly the title of this series, Philosophizing in a Globalized World. Well, philosophizing I found quite important in the sense that where there is dialogue, there is philosophy. It can be dialogue among the people themselves as a smallish little group, but out of there, like it was in the case of Socrates, his dialogues provided more and more space for more dialogues. So in that case, I accept that you can philosophize, for that matter, in any language, as long as there is dialogue. And dialogue, I want to add something to it, critical dialogue. There must be a sense of critique in the dialogue. Then you are engaged in dialogue. So I underline critical. Well, globalized. The world has been globalized for a long time. Maybe by one of the things which globalized the world was trade. Way back, there was trade among people in this globe. But circumstances changed and continue to change. And so, trade of that time is different from trade today. And so we are talking, or at least I understood, that globalized today means, yes, we can acknowledge that trade played a role in the globalization of the world today. But I would like, from that perspective, to align myself with some philosophers who argue that it is economic fundamentalism which today globalized the world. Here, for example, you might like to think of the New Zealand lady philosopher who wrote the book Economic Fundamentalism. So the title is clear from this lady, Economic Fundamentalism. Of course, Why does she call it economic fundamentalism? Because she is arguing against the dogmatic underpinnings of economic fundamentalism today. So dogma and science do not go together. Dogma and philosophy do not go together. Yet, we should make a recognition of a particular exception. Science, as you know, in English, always comes with the expression logy, like anthropology, sociology. The ogy all the time, there you have your idea of science. Yet, we also have ogy, in this case, theology. It can be Islamic theology, it can be Christian theology, it can also be Judaic theology. But it is only in theology, as far as I'm aware, that you find within the syllabus what is called dogmatic theology. So somehow, science and dogma meet in this discipline called theology. In other, the moment we can include the word dogma in philosophy, then we no longer have philosophy. So, but when it comes to theology, well, there you are. You have people like Bonhoeffer, you name them, who are interesting and important writers on dogmatic theology, people like Karl Rahner, for example. So, there is an interesting mix of science and dogma. Now, I'm going to speak about Ubuntu in dialogue with other philosophies. And one reason why I invoke the issue of dogma will appear as I elaborate on the philosophy of Ubuntu, the core of which is that dogmatic thinking is impermissible. Dogmatic reasoning cannot be and is not part and parcel of the philosophy of Ubuntu. One point. The next point is this, that when I discuss the philosophy of Ubuntu, which is discussed extensively in chapter 3 of the book that Professor Kane showed you. So here I'm not going to go into those details because I do hope that you will have access to the book at your own time in your own library to check on chapter 3. What I am interested in for now is to indicate to you that because Ubuntu has the perspective of wholeness, this one I wish to underline. Wholeness is not the same as holism. You get the point? The suffix ism is in contrast as well as in tension. It's not only a contrast, it's a tension between ness and ism. There is a difference. So because of that thinking, the holistic thinking, not holistic thinking as we write it normally in English, no. The whole-istic, that one represents and identifies the reasoning of Ubuntu. Whole-istic. Just to teach English some philosophy. We don't teach English. we teach English philosophy, because no language contains all that is required for philosophical reasoning. No single language contains everything that we require for philosophical reasoning. I'm not too sure if Dasein of Heidegger can be an illustration of the point that even German language had to be taught or to be invited to think in other conceptual categories, philosophically speaking, which are not ordinarily available in everyday German. So you see, it is so that philosophizing, philosophy, can teach any language to reason philosophically, and in that way expands the horizons of its reasoning. Because of this holistic orientation that I'm adopting as the exposition of Ubuntu here, it is not going to be possible for me to talk with you systematically and no. Why? Because we have the strictures of time. We have to work within time. You will see that in the book I also suggest that actually we must distinguish between living in time and living time. Now, Ubuntu lives time. Now we are supposed to adapt to living in time. It's not a problem because we are aware of it, but it's a problem in the sense that whatever I would have liked to say by way of expansion has to be limited. And so you will be listening or hearing an unfinished story. And this unfinished story is good because it just heightens the point that living time is different from living in time. So I will be stopped at a particular juncture of my exposition, and you might think, but the story is good. No, think from the perspective of wholeness. And when you think from the perspective of wholeness, the unfinished story is finished and yet not finished. Okay? So there we are. Now, the request was that we should see how it is when we philosophize in other languages. In this case, the indigenous African vernaculars that I know. Well, the challenge was this, that, okay, we accept that philosophy is dialogue, critical dialogue, one. Now, if you accept that, am I going to come here and talk philosophy in our languages? Well, the challenge was, am I sure that you would understand isiZulu, isiXhosa, or isiSotho? Well, no, the answer was a cautious no. So that means I must then be able to communicate with you in a language that is accessible, and this is the language that I'm speaking now. Okay. Now, this particular language that I am speaking now is supposed to function as a vehicle to convey to you what we are talking about when we talk philosophy. And I rest on the etymological meaning of this concept, simple and straight. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. And so, seen from that perspective, it is impossible to claim that any human community anywhere on this planet, it is impossible to claim that any human community on this planet does not philosophize. Why? Because philosophy springs from human experience, and experience is varied, it is everywhere. But there are certain elements of experience which actually are common to us all as human beings. There are many examples of this, but I would like to focus just only on one. And this one has got two sides to it. One is the fact that we are born, and the other one is the fact that we die. And so, when we think about these experiences, we arrive at different answers depending on where we are based culturally. We arrive at different cultures. But what confronts us is one and the same experience. What is that? It's exactly the point. If I may summarize it, the point is that, you know, the random indeterminacy of birth, the random indeterminacy of birth is counterbalanced by one thing, and one thing only, and that is the irrevocable finality of death. That one is everywhere. It's everywhere. And so we are confronted with this. We try to give all kinds of answers that I will not get into. But some of these answers are philosophical, others are theological. Okay. Now, because of this combination, theological and philosophical, I have to agree with one observation made by Sarton, S-A-R-T-O-N. And his argument in volume 1 of the Introduction to the History of Science is that, you see, if we would understand the intellectual development of a people, we must take into account the religious problems and feelings. And this implies some knowledge, not only of its own religion, but of various other religions. Now, that means that it's a citation from Sarton. That means that, you know, it is not enough to know the religious perspectives or understandings of Ubuntu. It is also important for Ubuntu to know other religions. Well, history has it that Ubuntu has also the experience of two main religions imposed on it, namely Islam and Christianity. These two, as we know, have been imposed through the colonial history that we are aware of. And I use the word imposed for anyone who doubts imposition, it may be good to study the text of Pope Nicholas V, Romanus Pontifex, and you can see that impose is really the appropriate word. The Romanus Pontifex document was actually reissued in 1455. So you can see for yourselves that, okay, we have this imposition. So in that way, Ubuntu comes to know other religions, particularly Islam, as you find most of it, especially in East and West Africa. It knows that in the southern and parts of East and West Africa, depending on the colonizer, you found Christianity as well. And so, given this type of situation, it becomes important to take cognizance of the religious dimension of things when it comes to an understanding of Ubuntu. You see, we must see it so that the same Christianity that was coming through to this region of the world actually is interesting, especially if one studies, for example, Deuteronomy in the Old Testament and Exodus also in the Old Testament with regard to Deuteronomy chapter 5. And so I gave the text here, so specific text. It's chapter 5, verse 6, 7, and then Exodus 22, 1 and 3. What is important to understand the logic of imposition is just the beginning, the introductory words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall not have no other gods before me. So this is a declaration of religious war. This is an endorsement of religicide. You find the same wording in Exodus 22.3. So you can see that when this religion comes to Ubuntu, it comes as a religion of no longer your religion, but my religion. And so there is no dialogue but confrontation. Voilà. Now, you see, this has to be taken into account. I put it at the back of our minds when we want to think about Ubuntu. And so when you asking, we now are going to be engaged in dialogue. What are the elements of this dialogue? Another element of the dialogue is that, well, colonization was not a free-for-all act of charity, as we know. From Amos Ijah, we know that, in fact, colonization is unjustifiable from any angle, including the doctrine of the just war that developed in this part of the world, from Cicero to Aquinas to Augustine, you name them. Okay, now, that means the second element would be economicide. So, the killing of other economies so that the economy of the conqueror succeeds. And so, you will have also the other element with lots of ramifications called epistemicide. So it is not surprising historically that you find books, for example, the book of Dos Santos, Epistemologies of the South, and the subtitle is Justice Against Epistemicide. It's not surprising. Now, Ubuntu is taking cognizance of this. That you have to see that this history is part and parcel of the experience of Ubuntu. This is what I want to underline. This history is part and parcel all the time of the experience of Ubuntu, okay? Then, even the same Dos Santos writes another book. This time, it is called The End of the Cognitive Empire. The End of the Cognitive Empire. You see, because intellectual imprisonment, intellectual captivity, epistemicide was the issue. Now, I think that I have laid down a broad framework, just in outline, to be able for you to see why and how and why Ubuntu will be engaged in dialogue with others. So a brief word on Ubuntu itself. You see, when you look at the word, it is an Nguni term, Ubuntu. Now, if you are a speaker of the Sesotho languages, the same word, Ubuntu, will be written B-O-T-H-O, Ubuntu. The same word will be written B-O-T-H-O. Then we call that Ubuntu. All right? If you cross, for example, the boundary to the north and you enter Zimbabwe, the same word, or rather concept, will be hunu in Shona, in the Shona language there, hunu. Now, H-U-N-H-U, hunu. And so you go right up to Kiswahili. You see? So what you see is this, that this word stands normally as one word. It's one word, Ubuntu. Now we go to its philosophical meaning, because up to now I have just suggested that this concept is present in many African languages, including Kiswahili. And in the text you will see how far these Bantu-speaking languages go, the geographic aspect of these languages. Okay. Now, what you see is this, that even if it is written as one word, actually you can break it up into two components. One component is ubu, just you be you. That's one component. You be you, one component. And so when you look at this ubu, if you like Sotho languages, you can do the same. You break it up into bo, bo. See, let's take these two, for example. Now, be you, or bo. If you take that, you will notice something. From this ubu, I don't have to put ntu. I can say ubu-ntu. Ubu-ntu means pain. It's pain. If I speak Sotho, bu-ntu. So it is pain. I could also not write ntu, for example. I could simply decide now I'm going to, instead of ntu, I'm going to put L-O-I, boloi. Boloi. Now, boloi translates into witchcraft. Okay? The same I can do with ubu. I can say ubu-takati. It means the same thing. It means boloi, but in the Nguni languages, if you translate. So what you draw from this is the following, that you see ubu is the highest level of generality. Is the highest level of generality. Why? Because it is waiting, let me use here the language of contemporary communication technology. It waits for you to log into Ubu. Ubu is there, but you must log into it with something, you see. So you can log into Ubu with ubu-ntu, if you like. If at that time you don't want to chat about Ubuntu, then you can log into it with ubu-ntu, then you're chatting about pain if you don't want to log into that. So you see, that's why I call it the highest level of generality. But it is for that reason, not a waiting for Godot. You see, it's not waiting for Godot, because Godot never comes. But in this case, you see, Godot will come when you put this or that or the other. And when it is waiting as the highest level of generality, please note what I said, waiting for. It means it is in action. There is no time that Ubu is at rest. It is in action. It is waiting. It is not waited. It will say waited when you put ubu-ntu or hlungu or I have waited, finally you have put this. But before you do that, it is not so. And where does this lead to? It leads to the point that from the perspective of Ubuntu, philosophically speaking, motion is the principle of being. Okay? Motion is the principle of being. In the Western philosophical tradition, we go straight to Heraclitus, Panta Rei, everything flows. You can't step into the same river twice. Okay? So there you are. You have motion is the principle of being. And so Ubu is a representative of this, the Ubu part of it. You get it? So when you see it from that perspective, then you say, motion is the principle of being. And so you shouldn't be surprised when you read chapter 3, for example, of the text, and you see me write be-ing. It's not the same as so many people translate. For example, Heidegger's Sein und Zeit, they go to being and time without hyphen. Now, the being of Ubuntu is something else. It's B-ing. Why? Because you must respond to the Ubu part of the reasoning. You must respond to that. Therefore, it must be be-ing. When you have logged in, then it becomes being, the usual ordinary being. You get the point? So please, be not surprised when you see the interplay in the text between B-ing and now, what does that other one mean? Well, then too, as the suffix, does not stop being. It simply is a manifestation of the wholeness of being. It is still saying, I am in motion. I am in motion. Now, taken from the example I have given you of life and death, it means that the moment we enter into the world, we start the journey to exit from this world. So that is why we talk the language of ness. Now, one philosopher, physicist, who does it very well to show this part of the story is David Bohm. Way back in the 70s, he wrote a seminal article. I call it seminal because on this article, he built a lot of understanding of the suffix ness. Now, the article published in the 70s, I believe it was 1972, the article goes under the title, Fragmentation in Science. Please note, fragmentation in science and society. So, what do they fragment? What does science and society, what do they do? Break what into pieces? What they break into pieces is the wholeness of being. They break into pieces the wholeness of being. And he elaborates on this point in his later book published in 1983, and the book is Wholeness and the Implicate Order. So, wholeness. Now, you see, he is immediately different in terms of the suffix. He writes wholeness. The usual understanding is holism. Now, you find here, for example, Henri Bergson, okay? Wholeness, it's not in him. He uses the concept of holism, Henri Bergson, holism, okay? Who else uses that? And they know each other. I could gather from the literature that one knows the work of the other. So Henri Bergson knows also the work of Jan Smuts, who was one time prime minister of the country I come from, or country I was born in. And, well, what is the title of his book, Jan Smuts? Holism and Evolution. See, holism and ism. Now, Bohm consciously departs from this suffix, ism. He uses the resources of science, especially because he is a physicist, and he uses also the resources of philosophy because he's a philosopher, to say, I am breaking away from ism, I am moving to ness as a suffix. And why? Because he wants to preserve the idea I told you about with regard to Ubuntu, that when you log in, you don't stop being. You are being without a hyphen, but the substratum remains B-E-ing. And so, because of that, you retain this. Now, you need a language that speaks to this type of philosophical orientation. And according to Bohm, he repeats this point twice in that article, plus also in his book. He repeats the point. A lot of Western languages actually don't have this way of looking at reality as, yes, I am, but in permanent motion. He says, no, you don't have. And so, what do you find? in Ubuntu you have that. But he's got a very important concept to identify the language that is missing. And the language that is missing is the language of the reo mode. Reos. Panta, rei, reios. Things are moving. So he constructs an English concept from the Greek, and then, wow, reomodic language. Well, I suspect that if Bohm knew the Bantu languages, he would have said, oh, but we have something there. In Ubuntu, we have reomodic language. Reomodic language. I notice that this type of thinking, from some of my readings on Japanese legal philosophy and psychology, I see that there are somewhere there is some affinity between Ubuntu on this point, on the reo mode, and Japanese language, which I know zero about. But I see from the text that I'm reading that, one of the best partners in discourse on reo mode is exactly Japanese. Well, now you see, this is the reason why in the abstract I proposed that I would speak around fluvial logic. Fluvial, river is fluvius in Latin. So the river, the flow of the river. Because of time, I'm going to give you two examples, and I will take them from the river. When you go to the villages until today, in many parts of Africa, including South Africa, you will see that a lot of young people, especially girls, still go to the river to draw water. And they must take this water home. Well, they don't carry the water by the handle of the bucket. No, the bucket must be on their head. And they don't walk for 2 kilometers and they have arrived. Generally, they move and walk for more than 2 kilometers. Okay. You see, one thing they must do is to make sure that the water never spills. Because if it spills, you arrive home with very little water in the bucket, and you have walked for so long. So you see, they develop a technique of keeping balance. Things must be balanced. The way they walk, the feeling on the head. I went with one of my colleagues from Belgium to Zimbabwe, and he saw this. Hey, how did they do it? My friend, let me tell you, you grow up with these things, but it has got a philosophical dimension, which you teach by huge books. Do you know what it is? Fluvial logic, carrying the water on your head, teaches you balance. We need balance. Dionysius and Apollonius are fighting all the time. Feeling, so do you cancel one or the other? How do you keep the balance? Now you see, it does not become very necessary to be so complicated and talk about Dionysian principle and Apollonian principle. It's nice, but you can reach You can reach an African child. You can teach them about Dionysius and Apollonius just by saying, take from what you have. Take from what you have, and then you can move along. You see, still from the river, when they arrive home, they know that it was a long walk. It was trouble to really put these things into balance, you know? So what do? I saw it with my own eyes because we grew up in so-called urban areas, but some of our relatives are in the rural areas, so we go to them to visit. And I was watching as a little boy. Our aunt, you would get a dish to wash your hands, then she would take pour and wait. Then she looks at you, pause, and wait. She made sure that, every drop of water is used. No just flow of water for nothing. Every drop of water must be used. So, what do you learn from that? Measure things. Things must be measured. Things must be measured all the time. So, the principle, the golden rule, as we learn about it on Aristotle and many others, that the golden rule is moderation. Moderation. Do things in moderation. It becomes very direct and easy to introduce an African child to all these complexities of the eudaimonic ethics of Aristotle and how this thing is shining, the principle of moderation. It is shining. How this principle actually can be found. Call it, if you like, unconsciously, if you like to put it that way. But it is already available in the fact that water is to be used properly and appropriately and in a way that does not result in any waste. So you can see that when you have, for example, the declaration in Western philosophy, man is the measure of all things. Well, man is the measure of all things. We find it way back in ancient Western philosophy. But as time went on, a colleague and I thought, that one is a problem because it does not apply 100% in our contemporary world. So we wrote a co-authored article under the title, Money is the Measure of All Things. And we put these two in conversation. Man is the measure of all things, in contrast with money is the measure of all things. Now, that money is the measure of all things is actually the point of the economic fundamentalism that I have referred to you already, and it is precisely that which has engaged African languages. I have a lot of books that I thought we would discuss, but I see I must stop. You see, one of them is completely in an African language called Setswana. And it's written by a young man I never knew, because when he was active in the country, when he was studying, when he was doing, I was in exile. I could not get to know him. But about 4 weeks ago, I went, when his death was announced, I went to his home, and 2 days later, 3 or 4 days later, I went also to get him buried. You may ask, but you didn't know him. I didn't have to know him in person. His deeds, his actions spoke to me. I was exercising solidarity. Now, among the things he did in his life is that he was a medical doctor. And that is one area where I could see, from what I heard, that he has been really a brother without knowing that he's got a brother in exile. And so his name is Mogobe Ramose. He's written several books in his native Setswana. And one of the books is this one, called Nnete ke Serunya. Now, Nnete means truth. It translates into truth. And Serunya is a, a mole. A mole, Ant Hills of the Savannah is one of the interesting books in African literature. But you also have a mole. And this mole, which looks like an anthill, has got a little animal in the family of rats. And this animal in the family of rats slowly eats up this nice rondavel mole. It eats it up until it collapses. So the imagery of the mole related to Nnete is truth. The imagery of the mole associated with truth is that, yes, thank you, is that, please remember, whatever else you want to hide will not be hidden forever, especially if it is a lie, because finally the truth shall prevail. So this book contains a number of short stories, most of which, it's just that, most of which really are prefaced on one or more, and in most cases, more proverbs in African languages. And then he develops these proverbs. Now, you have been told during the introduction by Professor Ganes that actually I edited the Liber Amicorum of Professor Heinz Kimmerle. Now, the same Professor Heinz Kimmerle has written a very important article in a series of proverbs published by the University of South Africa. And this article has the argument that proverbs are an important source of philosophy. Even Heraclitus really thought in terms of symbols and proverbs. Yet, he's on the list of Western philosophers. So we cannot say proverbs are not part and parcel of philosophy. And Mogobe really shows in this, and he wrote several books. One of them is actually a prescribed text in secondary school back in South Africa. And this particular one has at the bottom, winner of the 1995 Bertram's VO Literary Award. Now, I really, if you spoke the language, you could see why he could receive that literary award. And so I leave you with the points made. There are many, but as I promised you, it will not be possible to talk about all of them. I hope that when we have the following session of question, comment, and answer, maybe I could touch on some of these. For now, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Ramose, for this very comprehensive introduction into all these various aspects of the language problematic and of the concept of Ubuntu, which you could, of course, touch only to a certain degree. But now I would like to open the floor for comments, questions, so for the discussion, and here you can of course, ask questions to explore more on points which you did not understand, which were not enough explored in your opinion, etc. So, Professor Ramose is still here with us for another about half an hour even, so use your chance. I would say students first.
Okay. Can you hear me? How do you?
Das ist nur für die Aufzeichnung.
Ach so. So I actually wrote my bachelor thesis a month ago about Ubuntu and Jürgen Habermas' deliberative democracy to analyze the political party system in South Africa. And last year I spent about 4 months in South Africa, in Cape Town. And I wrote about how Ubuntu could also be used to kind of Africanize Western Western democracy. So I would just want, like, the deliberative democracy is like, has a down to top progression, which I think is like kind of what Ubuntu wants to implement as well. So I was just wondering, how do you think about that? Like, could Ubuntu be used to kind of Africanize Western democracies in Africa? Because we see like liberal democracies in Africa are kind of failing at the moment, like around the whole continent. And even in South Africa, like a lot of people don't vote there. So do you think that Ubuntu could be helpful to get people to vote or to implement it?
What do you propose? Do we take one at a time or two?
No, I think one at a time.
One at a time. Please. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for having thought of writing your work on this particular topic you're telling us about, and especially your thinking about Habermas. Well, yes. Emmanuel Eze way back wrote an essay, and part of his essay was on the point related to Habermas. And one of the points he made was that, you see, Habermas remembers Africa only when he's talking about Europe. Well, the implication was that if he didn't talk about Europe, then for him there would be no need to talk about Africa. So that's point number one. The second point is this, that indeed you are correct to describe Western as deliberative democracy, okay? And so, not so long ago, maybe you found him in your research, I don't know, but there is a certain Judge Dennis Davis. He's very popular. He even has a program on TV, Judge for Yourself. Now, he is a writer. He writes many books. One of the books he wrote is called Democracy and Deliberation. And now he was focusing on democracy that is currently prevailing in the country. Well, you see, it should be interesting that Davis uses the concept of deliberation just as Habermas uses the concept of deliberation. So you see, there is a kind of consensus between the two. And I'm most grateful to you that you identify what it is, Western democracy, okay? It is so Western that from the start of the country called South Africa, it is called South Africa. It doesn't mean to say I call it South Africa. If it must be called South Africa, then we must be clear. It should be called Conqueror South Africa. There are lots of articles in the literature which show why Conqueror South Africa. But you see, from the time it started, when you follow the constitutional history, from 1910 until 1994, what do you find? Not a single one of those constitutions contain the concept Ubuntu. And yet, Abantu are supposed to be governed under this constitution. You see, the Constitution of 1993 contains Ubuntu in the post-amble. In the post-amble. That is the exception. Now, when you do juridical interpretation, you know that according to this study called the interpretation of statutes, the preamble and the post-amble are simply decorations. They are not the substance of the law. Where the substance matters, Ubuntu does not exist in any of the constitutions of that country. Not at all, including the one which is called the Final Constitution of 1996. Please read it as many times as you can. You will never find Ubuntu. So from that historical perspective, it becomes very difficult. Never mind. There are a lot of judgments which invoke Ubuntu. The first judgment on the abolition of capital punishment, as versus Makunyani, the first judgment has got 5 judges who invoke Ubuntu. 4 of them are white, only 1 is black. And if you do juridical interpretation, you can see that the reason for the decision, what is called technically ratio decidendi, it did not require that. It was just, again, a decoration. You see? So, this tells us something about the exclusion of Ubuntu and deliberative democracy of the West. What does it tell us? That when we look at Ghana, which was in sub-Saharan Africa, the first country to gain independence, 20 years after the independence, 1957, 1977, Ghana was already presenting arguments and proposing a referendum to do what? To do away with deliberative democracy of the West because it has no roots in Africa. It doesn't speak to the African people. Why? Part of the reason is that it was imposed. It was part and parcel of the Epistemicide. Now it doesn't work. Now, 1977, Ghana was saying no to this. Can you imagine what that means? Why did every other successive African country take the same? When in fact they were aware that this is actually no longer acceptable. Can you see? The answer is complex, but it is true that it went up right up to conqueror South Africa, where it was accepted not by the majority. Now I want to tell you something about village and home. Do you know that until today, in the villages, you have no street name, no street number? Now how do you compile a voters register? No street name, no street number. Can you see how you're going to play games on the liberative democracy of the West? Can you see? The other thing is, now this is my final point, it's not only Ghana which actually thought of, let us do away with this, it is un-African. Namibia, under the pen of founder, said, no, we don't want this. It doesn't really speak. If it must speak, let it be a kind of dialogue. Who else? He luckily wrote his book also. In fact, the original title of the book is in German, and then it is translated into English, and this is the book by Benezet Bujo, The Ethical Dimension of Community. The consensual democracy is the African way of democracy, the palaver. He's one of the latest. Many others who were saying no to this, he said, let us come to consensus about what we want to do. There's no need for rivalry, for opposition. We don't need that. We can talk together and come to a common conclusion and implement. Why do you need opposition, this opposition, to do what? Because we will be opposing one another in our debates to build consensus. So let everybody come to the platform. Let us build consensus, and there we continue. So, you know, one-party statism or two-party statism, party, just to be party means you're taking sides. And already the element of introducing dogma is very potentially present. Whereas if you're just, everybody is everybody's business, right? So let everybody be involved until we come to a final decision. This is the African model of democracy, by consensus, not competition. There is an interesting debate, if you like, between Eze and Kwasi Wiredu on this point. Because you're people of the farm, just like Emmanuel Eze and Kwasi Wiredu, you will see the debates on this point. That, you know, it is not so that if you are a Democrat in the United States and another one is a Republican, you are actually arguing seriously. Why? Because dogma tells, argue about this, but don't argue about whether or not capitalism is correct. No, you just have to be carpenters of capitalism. Leave it as it is. So what are you talking about? Is that not dogma? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this answer, and thank you very much for your important question. I think, as your answer shows, it is a very complex and also controversial topic where you have been writing about. What concerns, by the way, the debate between Eze and Kwasi Wiredu, one of the issues, the second issue of the journal Polylog is dedicated to the model of consensus democracy of Kwasi Wiredu. So you can read about this debate in German via the platform of the journal Polylog, polylog.net, where it is open access if you want to read more about it. And another comment, Professor Ramose referred several times to his book on Ubuntu. He was so generous to donate 2 copies of the book to our center today. We are very grateful for this. So who needs access to the book can also just approach me, and we can help you if you want to read this book. Okay, next questions. I saw 2 other people raising their hand, Rolf and then Katrin.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have just a short question about the word Ubuntu. Like in English or in German, we have a substantive, a verb, an adjective. What kind of word is it? Is it a substantive or a verb? Or can you make a verb out of it? Can you say, I'm doing Ubuntu, or what kind of quality? I'm
Yes,
interested in what
Prof.
this kind of word
Thank
is.
you. Thanks for the question. It is a verbal noun.
A verbal noun, okay.
Exactly. It is a verbal noun. That's right. That's right. Thank you. Yeah, I elaborate to explain in the text why it is a verbal noun. But the short answer is this one, a verbal noun.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your lecture. I have 2 points, 1 comment and 1 question. First, the comment. I understood your explanation about the point that Ubu, if I understood it right, is the highest level of generality. You said this. And then you explained that Ubu, as this highest level of generality, is kind of waiting. And kind of being in action, you said, but it's waiting for questions, for interactions. So I like very much this waiting mode. That's the comment. And the question is that I could also, with this Heraclit thing in my bag from European perspective, I couldn't understand very well the importance of motion and fluidity also. And for me, the philosophy of American pragmatism is very important, and they are starting thinking from motion, from change. Yeah, this I understood, but then the step to wholeness, yeah, I thought that you put it very close together, a very little step from motion to wholeness, and I did not understand this. Because for me, the contrary to motion and fluidity is kind of fixation, and the contrary to wholeness is fragmentation. I think it's different. So can you explain me this step? For me, it's a huge step from motion to wholeness, and for you, I think it's a tiny step.
I have the impression you read the book because from the time you use fixation, that's what gives me the impression. Because actually in the book, I do critique fixation to being. I use precisely the word fixation to being without a hyphen, right? So if you fix to that, there is a problem. Now, okay, how do you move to wholeness? You see, well, if it is being, it is really being. It is not the whole of being because you close it, you put boundaries, all right? So if you don't put boundaries because you don't know who is going to log in with to what. That's the point. You don't know who is going to log into this Ubu with what, okay? So because you don't know, you remain open, not to the whole, but to the wholeness. Why-ness? Because you must respect the fact that this Ubu is not fixed. It is in motion, okay? That's step 1. So the ness becomes necessary, but because you cannot define the ness in advance, then it becomes a wholeness. You can't define it in advance. So that is the reason for wholeness, one reason. Okay, the other reason is even in Western philosophy, way back, we follow from ancient Western philosophy, what do we see? We see that there is a struggle to actually determine the question, what is the best state of being? What is the best state of existence? Well, what we have found are two schools. One school, motion is the best state of being. The other school, rest is the best state of being. So take, for example, St. Augustine. You know, what does he say, among others? Our heart is restless until it rests in thee. You are the final rest. The best state of being is rest. And the other school, the best state of being is motion. You see? So there are two reasons why we have this ness. Now, you know, a book like The Intelligent Universe written by Hoyle, and there is another. Scientists these days write lots of books. So Hoyle is one of them. I just give you, it's called The Intelligent Universe. And then the other one coming after, years after Hoyle, is by Davis, The Edge of Infinity. Even from the edge of infinity. You're going down the precipice, right? You are at the edge of infinity. Remember also one of the texts containing an interview with Emmanuel Levinas. What was the title? Ethics and Infinity. So you see, infinity, you can't finish. Now there's another one in science also called the unfolding universe. We no longer talk from a scientific point of view in terms of universe, but of pluriverse. We talk in terms of pluriverse because this one is just a little part of what there is. So there is a whole lot of wholeness. We must remember also something that people might think, this, you know, when Jimmy Carter was campaigning to be president of the United States, one of the things he told the American people was, hey, if you elect me, I am going to write a letter to the extraterrestrial beings. And they're thinking he's mad. And you see, he said, yes, I'm going to write. If you elect me, I'm going to write a letter to the extraterrestrial beings because I saw an UFO, unidentified flying object. And he was so convinced that he saw an UFO that he decided, I am going to do this. Well, the American people heard him. I see many people shake their heads, correctly so. Why is he mad? You know, of course, we can ask the same about Trump. Anyway, and there he comes, he is elected president. Wow. Indeed, Jimmy Carter wrote a letter, and it went by spaceship. He didn't even know whether these people speak English or even, but no issue. No, he wrote the letter. It's supposed to reach them around 250 years from the time he wrote. You see, during this space, whatever, it is gone. What? In 2017, the same United States decided, again on space exploration. Now, this was the project of SETI. SETI, S-E-T-I. SETI stands for Search for Extraterritorial Intelligence, because the scientists are arguing in a queue that intelligence does not come from this planet, Okay? So they now gave details about our DNA, this, that, scientific. So you can see now that Carter was not so mad, because now, even in his own country, the United States, they now are busy trying to telling them, hey, if you don't know us, we are here. Scientifically speaking, if you don't know us, we are here. So what do I want to emphasize by this? Again, the idea of wholeness. You see, that somehow we are fixed to the idea that this globe is. You see, but this fixation to the globe is scientifically untenable, speaking the language of the natural sciences. So we have to speak in planetary terms. You see, now if we have planetary reasoning, then the story is different. Then the story is different. There we see wholeness proper, because a lot of scientists, especially astrophysicists, will tell you that it is continuing. The whole thing is continuing. You see? So that's why there is also, even now lately, from a scientific point of view, reason why we must talk the language of wholeness and not the language of holism. Okay, that's as far as I can answer. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question by Yoko.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Even before you mentioned Japan, I just thought that, wow, there's just something about it that's very similar in spirit. So I got curious, and I looked at Ubuntu in Japanese, and it is similar, and that is this, in Japanese, how they explain it. Well, it's a concept that we all know. It's the source of healing, and it's the source of togetherness that's beyond human, but human together, and it's always there, and we immediately are already there. And when we speak in reference to that. And something about your presentation, I got that idea, and I thought, wow, it's somehow very interesting, because it's a very different culture, but that part is, to me, very similar. And but is that also true, the idea of healing? That's also there?
Yes, you see, I'm glad you say, when I presented this concept of Ubuntu in one of the conferences we had in Tokyo, yes, a lot of Japanese colleagues recognized what you're telling us now, and they even gave me specific Japanese terms for this, to say, you see, this is similar, we have the same. And not so long ago, last year, one of our Japanese colleagues, when we met in Rome, he came to say, you know, I must give you this. I said, what? And then he showed me a book in Japanese, and I told him, but I don't. He said, no, I've brought you specifically this book from Japan, because here at page so-and-so, this is talk about you and how you elaborate on Ubuntu, and the author concurs. And then he showed me another page which was not written in Japanese, so I could read. He said, do you see even your name in the way you write? So yes, there is a lot of affinity between Ubuntu and Japanese ways of thinking on this point. I picked up that when I was reading something on legal philosophy, and then there's an article, I just say, it's written by an American who was then when I presented this, then we had a very interesting discussion in Tokyo about that. Yeah, no, affinity is recognized. That one I'm satisfied with. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I spent the last 7 months in Japan speaking Japanese, and I became more and more relaxed because of this healing quality.
Exactly.
It's not personally attacking.
That's right.
It's the comfort zone.
Exactly.
Last 3 weeks, I had a guest from Austria.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, boom, oh my God, it's too hard.
Yeah.
I'm suffering, I'm this, I'm that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, so, well, it's the communications mode that's very, yeah.
Yeah,
There's a felt difference in
exactly, and it respects relationality in a very serious way.
That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
But I never actually in my head connected to that, to Ubuntu. I mean, I knew that from Uncle, I mean, I knew that as an African concept, but I never really felt it to be similar to my own linguistic background.
I see. No, it definitely is. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, thank you. That's very interesting.
yeah,
Well,
it
personally,
is. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for raising this question. I think this is also a very nice point to stop our today's lecture, because it shows how fruitful it can be to do intercultural philosophy or philosophy in a globalized perspective, namely to explore exactly such such interesting points where nobody until now really is thinking about, or very few people are thinking about and working on it. For example, like this comparison between the Nguni languages and Japanese. I mean, there's really a lot of philosophical work still to be done, and we hope to do it in the next years also in our center here in Hildesheim. Thank you very much for your today's presentation. We in our center are very happy to have you here for the next weeks and explore the topics more. Thank you for coming and for your questions, and happy Easter.